All right. It is a big bummer that this has not happened before, that Doug Bowman has been on my screen, live reacting. I've listened to Doug, I've read Doug's, absorbed all of the content, but we've never had you on the show. We are excited to welcome in Doug Bowman. First time on the show. He's a Richmonder, a writer for 24/7, has always done a fantastic job. I highly suggest following him. I don't think there's anybody listening to this show that probably doesn't already, but if you are one of those people, please do so. Again, sad this is the first appearance, but it certainly won't be the last. Doug, how we doing, my man?
I'm good. I'm just glad I might have taken over Matei's role joining on. I'm going to hold this over him for a while
now. We haven't had Matei on in a while either.
Yeah, you don't need to. Just leave him out there. Yeah.
I got to tell you, well, first of all, we'll start with the Hokie haiku. It comes from Pete McGee. Dug in the details, scores poured over pointed notes. Bowman brought insight. Now, Doug, the reason for this podcast, you broke the internet a couple of weeks ago, presenting and basically laying out and walking through the entire Board of Visitors presentation that Whit Babcock put together. We're not going to go through all of the slides and everything. You can find that. Tech Sideline has done amazing reporting on it. And honestly, if you want to read about it, go ahead and check out your original thread on your Twitter for it. But I do just want to ask you, walk me through when you stumbled upon this and what happened from there.
Yeah. So it was Friday. It was Friday night, having a big social night, I guess I'm one of those weirdos, sickos, whatever you want to call it. I go through the Board of Visitors notes for every meeting, which there's like 3 or 4 per year. So I knew there was one coming up in August, and there's like a legal requirement to post the open materials or whatever ahead of time. So I know to check, like, I don't know what the time frame is, but I know to check at some point ahead. So anyways, I guess this was last Friday now. My wife and I were actually over at one of our friends' house. Her husband was out of town. She has 2 kids under 2 years old. So they were doing we were helping her with bedtime. And my wife and I was sitting in the living room waiting for that to all play out. So I just was on my phone looking at the Board of Visitors notes, like one does on a Friday evening. And the agenda's right there in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And most of the beginning of the notes, it's like an 800, 900 page document. It's like the normal stuff. You might get some nuggets typically out of them, like about budget and finances. Like this one will tell you that the Metallica concert was 1.2 million in revenue. There's some of that stuff. But then I saw that Whit had this presentation at the end that was obviously about athletics, and then ABC Bring, Virginia Tech COO, also had a presentation on athletics. I was like, all right, this could be interesting. And they do typically include the slides in that. So I knew they were somewhere. So I just started scrolling. And I finally get to it. And again, most of these are the Virginia Tech or whoever's given the presentation knows it's a public information. Mm-hmm. So they're pretty bare bones most of the time. And this was not. And yep. I knew it immediately. Like you can see the first 3 questions he asks, going into the revenue share model, going into the Clemson and FSU settlement and TV viewership and all that stuff. Like I just kept scrolling and being like, wow, this is this is the presentation. This is it. It was an instant recognition of this is big.
So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, to finish that off, we're still at my friend's house and I'm scrolling through, and then I'm start checking around. I'm like, has Andy Bitter did Teal report this already? Somebody had to have gotten this, and it didn't look like it. So then my wife and I hopped in the car to drive home, picked up some dinner on the way, and I was like, so I know we gotta cook this dinner when we get home, but I have to go up to my office, and I have to do some nerdy stuff.
Yep.
And she was like, what does that mean? I said, I have to read through Virginia Tech Board of Visitors meeting notes. And it'll take 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. Of course, it did not take 20 minutes. She called out from downstairs 30 minutes in and was like, it's definitely been 20 minutes. I was like, give me 20 more minutes. Took about an hour and just screenshot.
Yep.
And then and then get it on a Twitter thread. And from there, it was just like phone blew up immediately. That was my saving grace. I know that it was Friday night and I did that with my social life, says something about that, but all y'all were on Twitter too as well. So thank you for the support.
Number one, first and foremost, I do want to commend you. It's a tremendous job, and to sacrifice your Friday. Hopefully, she is understanding following the explosion that we've seen.
I told her the next morning, I was like, the thing kind of blew up, and she was like, sick. I don't know, whatever.
So I wanted to touch on this at the end of the podcast, but you brought up an interesting point, which was usually these notes are very bare bone. And before we get into the positives, the negatives, and everything else that came from this board meeting, I want to preface everything. This is not going to be popular for people listening, but this is really kind of my opinion. If you are coming away from your release of the slides, the meeting that was just had, and everything that has happened in that window, and your reaction is Whit Babcock is a war criminal, you probably are looking at this the wrong way. And here's why I say that. There seems to be, whether intentional or unintentional, I'm not going to rule either way, but that this was made very public. This is something that people have discussed, the monetary issues regarding athletics with Virginia Tech for years. And I come away thinking this is the best thing I think Whit has done in a very long time, is making this public and having this, basically all of this dialogue come to an head where this is a critical moment for Virginia Tech. The comparisons I draw are as if you're a president, a mayor, a CEO, a coach, or athletic director, you will wear 100% of the blame and you will get about 6% of the credit. That's usually how that boils down to. I think he crushed this presentation. I refuse to believe that this conversation had never been had, probably behind closed doors and not aired out on Twitter with the board. I just refuse to believe that. I don't know that for a fact. But there were 7 media members at this event. It was well documented from jump. And, how much of this do you think was, I don't want you to infer that was calculated, but it certainly, I think, plays to our benefit that it is playing out publicly.
Yeah, I don't think it was a coincidence that the presentation was as detailed and as like explicit and obvious in what Whit was going to be asking for. He could have put less detail into it. It could have been a little more generic, and he could have relied on like I'm going to verbally explain this to the board just to be a little more like less public with it, because he knew somebody was going to find it. If it wasn't me on Friday night, it was going to be Bitter on Saturday. It was going to be Teal sometime. It was, if somebody was, I'm not the only one that checks those things. So somebody was going to report it ahead of the presentation, and he knew that. And I think that was intentional in how detailed he was, for sure. Otherwise it would have just been like a lot of uncertainty and a lot of guessing maybe about what and no real details, but that was like explicit and very intentional. It felt like I think he wanted other people to know, besides like just the inner circle of Virginia Tech athletics, of what was about to happen.
So let's speak about knowing. And I want to preface this comment by saying, I think Sandy Davis, who we'll talk about in a minute, has been unrightfully attacked for a quote that was put out. And the quote is this. Sandy Davis said that Babcock has given the group a lot to consider and says she's pained to see the Hokies near the bottom in funding compared to ACC peers. Now, I will say this. I think if every board member was in a picket line, we all wouldn't be able to pick them out, for the exception of maybe 1 or 2 of them. And I also don't think it's fair that Sandy has been kind of represented as somebody who has not understood or paid attention to anything going on. Sandy seems great. I read her profile, lives in Blacksburg. She goes to games, but that's not really what we're talking about. If this is brand new information for anybody, I find that very difficult to believe. If you just look at some of the things that have happened within the last, recently, the Study in Decline article that came out, a University of Texas beat writer wrote about it. It had, in 2018, Virginia Tech ranked 6th of 8 public ACC schools in sports administration expenditures. And when Justin Fuente arrived, they had 5 total recruiting and operations staffers. At the time, Clemson had 22. So that recently came out this summer. Now, if you want to turn the clocks back, you can look at Buzz Williams, you can look at Kenny, you can look at Coach Fuente, much maligned, some of them, but they all pointed to a lack of resources. When Kenny got to Kentucky, he pointed it out. When Buzz got to Texas A&M, he pointed it out. When Justin Fuente entered into the 2020 season, he pointed it out. In the announcement for the Reach for Excellence campaign, he was quoted as saying, "We have a responsibility to this university and to this football team to give these young men the resources and support that their peers across the ACC and other Power 5 programs currently receive." I'm not a big, I'm no Shakespeare here, but that essentially is saying that we do not have the resources to compete against our peers. And you look back to John Yetzi came on this very podcast, the most listened to podcast we ever did. We had about 12,000 people listen to that the first week that it came out. It was on every board, and it opened a ton of eyes regarding the standing of Virginia Tech and where we were. And then also this week there was Mac and Gramlich, and they were both saying, "Man, when I was freshman at Clemson, it was Tech, FSU, and Clemson." And do you find it difficult to believe that this is something that people were not aware of, or something that was not talked about explicitly and often?
It is a little hard to believe, and that was kind of one of my big takeaways is like this split feeling between like, yes, finally it's time, the big ask was made, this is what a lot of Virginia Tech fans have been wanting and asked and hoping for, and all, like, that's great that it's finally here. And then there's this whole other thing that's like, why did it take so long? It's August 2025. Like this felt like a presentation that could have been made 2 years ago pretty reasonably. And for the board to be educated or non-educated in some form, I think that's also a problem as well, whether they're super into it, but like you were talking about, and I know maybe it got taken out a little out of context of like, you didn't know anything. I'm sure they knew something, and there's definitely been asks like that. There's been this conversation. I went back and read, Whit did a interview with Bill Roth on, it was one of Tech's podcasts, I forget what they call it, but like he spelled out in June or July, I guess it was after the House settlement came out, like generally this presentation. So things have been percolating in the background for months and months and months. So I can't imagine that they haven't had some substantive discussions at some level with the board in particular, but it also clearly wasn't enough.
No.
And it just felt like, even if there were, like, nothing has happened, nothing has changed. It just seemed kind of like the complacency had set in, and it took this action by Whit to finally say, all right, I'm putting my foot down. I'm going to make the big ask, and I'm going to make it real public.
Yeah. And I would encourage everybody to, and again, this is not, I certainly hope this does not come across as declaring war against the board or declaring war against anybody. I would encourage you all to go listen back to some of the conversations that we had with Mayhul over the last couple of years, where he was on that board and they talk amongst each other. He was very candid about conversations that he had with Tim Sands, the conversations that he's had with Whit Babcock. And I think this playing out publicly is the best possible thing that can happen. And I'm not going to say that Whit and this athletic department is without flaws. There have been flaws. I would also point you to, yes, there's the financial slide that is up there, but Virginia Tech has really benefited from schools like Pittsburgh's, UVA's, NC State's only recently have been like, hey, let's pour money into this. And there's a gap now, but everybody's been kind of slow across this conference. So that's worth pointing out as well. The one thing that I read that I was shocked by that I did not know was David Cunningham put out a tweet. He said, Babcock said he understands cuts. Athletics was the only department at Virginia Tech during COVID that took pay cuts. That was the one thing I was pretty blown away by, given that they were taking pay cuts. And I'm not going to pretend to be a genius and expert on all of the budget sheets, but there's missed out ticket revenue, there's missed out opportunity. And it's just a culmination of a lot of things. And that brings me back to that football enhancement fund and the Reach for Excellence campaign. Chris Coleman brought this up on Tech Sideline. What happened to the football enhancement fund? That's another massive question that I have, is you're laying out these numbers, and I donated. I didn't donate a lot, but I donated to the campaign.
Yeah,
exactly. So, the football enhancement fund and the Reach for Excellence campaign, essentially, the way that I understand it is athletics was tasked to raise $12.5 million, and it was supposed to be matched from the university. I don't know where that money is. I don't. It would be super helpful, but the challenge when the Reach for Excellence campaign comes out, and that people don't talk about, is that is essentially right on the cusp of when everything changed. And I understand that every school is dealing with change, but specific to Virginia Tech, which is what we're talking about and what we have the microscope on, NIL became a thing, conference realignment became a thing. So all of this kind of happened at once, and there was this massive push. And I would like an answer from the university or the athletic department as to where those funds are. If they're being put in, where have they gone? If they're not being put in, why are they not? Do you have any insight to that, or was that something that we've ever gotten an answer on?
No. And it may be like an accounting thing that is tough to uncover, like where that money went. But it's also really interesting that that was a huge rollout,
massive,
like fully built website. Like
plans, I thought it was well done.
Like, yeah, explicit, like this is what the money's for. These are the steps, castle, football staffing, all that stuff was involved in it. And it is odd that what are we, 3 or 4 years out from now? Whit gives another big rollout, big presentation, doesn't mention it at all. Like there's not a single reference to like, hey, I know he referenced a whole bunch of stuff. There wasn't any reference to this big fundraising push, apparently, that was done a couple years ago.
Doug, I didn't even think of this until right now. It's also interesting that Aiden Green put that post out about the locker room being redone. It's interesting that the school has not acknowledged that happened. It would make sense to me that you wouldn't want to acknowledge that we just got the new locker room and then present on how we need more money. I know that, for some people that may be, why do we need more money? We just got a new locker room. It's interesting that had not been released by the school or by Hokies FB or anything. And again, I don't believe that this is I don't believe that this is trying to, every athletic department presents and says, we need more money. We need more money. We need more money. But for a millennia, I have been saying that the expectation at Virginia Tech is to beat Pittsburgh, beat Virginia, beat North Carolina. Like every time we go into these games, beat Syracuse. Every time it's expected that Virginia Tech is just going to steamroll these opponents. And, for years, that's how it's been. But when you look at the numbers on a spreadsheet and you begin to ask yourself, why is that the expectation other than that's just the way that it's been forever? If I went into the weight room and I said, hey, back in 2014, I was able to squat 450 pounds. That doesn't mean I'm going to go down to the Y and throw 415 pounds on my back, especially if I haven't been working out at the same rate that I have. So, that's just been a huge frustration point, is when we lose these games to these other opponents. You can point to this play, or you can point to this coaching decision, or you can point to anything. But when you take the totality of, what do you call it? You call it Heartbreak City. When you point to the totality of all the Heartbreak Cities that we've been in, it is really kind of the thing that you can point back to is a bunch of individual problems, but you can also point to the one massive problem that is funding.
Yeah, and it's the thing that gets brought up when you talk about like the SEC Big Ten thing. Is like it's not just 30 million in difference per year or in 1 year. It's year after year after year, and the cumulative impact. I know Whit laid out the numbers about like institutional support from UVA versus Virginia Tech, and the difference there is like 35 or 38 million over the last 5 years, and like that's all. Like that all affects what is happening on the field cumulatively, basically. So he's saying, like, what could have happened with this kind of funding over the last 5 years? And it's the big thing I heard from multiple people in the athletic department. since last Friday that like this is a long time coming, much needed. Like obviously everyone in the athletic department is ready for this level of investment to help make their jobs easier. To like, you know, it's Virginia Tech athletics has been remarkably resilient in terms of support and funding and all that stuff. Like Tech has had one good year, 1.5, 2, if you count 2019 too, in the last 15 years, and is still selling out multiple games a year. They figured out how to sell out the upper South end zone all of a sudden. Like somehow the support is still there without the results on the field matching it. And that's what Whit and the athletic department is essentially saying now is like this cannot continue. And your expectations, if your expectations are indeed like we want to be a top flight college athletics program, compete at the top of the ACC, win championships, all that stuff, then something's got to change. This is what has to change because I think the exact quote Whit said yesterday was like, your expectations do not match the level of investment that Virginia Tech gets right now.
You know, let's talk about Whit for a second. The one thing that kind of set my hair on fire when I read it, because we've said it before, if you talk to Whit one-on-one, awesome to talk to, solid communicator. You know, I've never had a bad interaction with Whit. But there have been some times in the past where there are things that are said and you're like, oh man, like, did we have to say that? Is that the exact wording that we wanted to use? And the one that got me was, this is an Andy Bitter tweet. And the tweet said, I don't plan on doing this job for many more years, either of my choosing or y'all's choosing. And again, this is not coming at Andy because he's sitting there trying to type and, there's a million things going on. So I read that tweet and I was like, oh no, like this is the first thing that I saw from this presentation. And a lot of the reaction was, man, is his heart even in it? Does he want to do it? And then you got the full quote. He said, it drives me every day. And quite frankly, it's taken some years off my life. I'm determined as ever. I don't plan on doing this job too many more years, either of my choosing or y'all's choosing. Maybe we could have been a little bit more precautious of what, if you took a sentence out of that or caught a sentence out of that, the reaction might have been, but I don't know who wouldn't feel this way. I have said this about university administrators, coaches. The new landscape of college athletics is exhausting, absolutely exhausting. And nobody signed up for this. I'm not throwing a pity party for anybody. I'm talking about from head coaches to GAs. What they're being asked to do is absolutely ridiculous and not at all what anybody signed up for. So I think he's being truthful there. And I don't think that there's a sense of him being checked out or removed or, when I was at school, I'm certainly not saying that everyone has to feel this way, but he was regarded as one of the top athletic directors in the country at the time when I was at Virginia Tech. So other than that, I feel like he kind of cooked. I feel like some of the quotes that he delivered, and again, I was listening to a little bit of Tech Sideline before we jumped on. I didn't get through the whole thing, but this is in a boardroom. So it's not like if you're thinking of a scene from like Boiler Room, or if you're thinking of a scene from like, some critical CEO scene with people banging on the table, throwing keys. It's probably not what it was. They're sitting by a golf course. It's a bunch of, older people, which is fine. But some of the quotes that he had, he said, if we don't radically leap forward now, we are likely sealing our own fate for years and generations to come. This is truly determining who we're going to be for the next 50 years. And I don't want to sound hyperbolic on this. I don't want to act like I'm handing in my fan card because I certainly am not. I will personally watch every Virginia Tech football game that I can. I will get back as often as I can. But for a lot of people, this is determining how much of a priority it is to go back to Blacksburg on Thursdays or Fridays or Saturdays or whatever day the ACC or whatever conference we're in has us play. This is determining the interest level of first-generation Hokies on if they want to come to a school that offers great academics and has a great athletic presence. And you have seen that in the SEC at Ole Miss, not even talking about Alabama, Georgia, all these other schools, Ole Miss, Missouri, Texas A&M, all of these other schools, Colorado. If you need an example, look at Colorado, the level of investment that they had and the level of attention, the level of uptick of applications that they received. This has to go the right way. if it does not go the right way, a lot of people will care a lot less about Virginia Tech. That's not hyperbolic. That is the truth.
Yeah, I thought of that quote, going back to like Whit's media appearances and like how he speaks publicly, one of the things that I've found him to be is intentional about his word selection. And he didn't just say like, if we don't leap forward, he said, if we don't radically leap forward, like this is not one of the things. The CFO came on later and was like, the budget used to be 87 million or whatever. Now it's 120. Like he was like, we haven't been sitting down. The question is, do we need to do even more than we've already been doing? But like Whit was being very intentional. This is not like a small ass. This is not a medium-sized ass. Like this is radically leaping forward, is what's required. So, I thought that was and he came out later and put the $200 million answer on the table as well, which I thought was right. I mean, you had to get to what's the actual ask. And he wasn't shy about what it is. Brought up like Stanford and Cal being like, that's what happens if you get left behind. And I think I thought it was one area that I thought could have been laid into a little more. He certainly hammered the marketing value of like broadcast television and the viewership, and the slide. One of the slides that stood out to me was that Virginia Tech last season, when they went 6-6 in football, when the men's basketball team wasn't very good, the marketing exposure equaled 122 million, according to Babcock, which was the exact same as the operating budget. Like even in a down year, mediocre football, bad basketball, in terms of marketing exposure, it paid for itself, is essentially what that was saying. Which is great, but I thought there was more like kind of what you were hinting at of like downside risk of what happens to the university, what happens to donor support, what happens to all this stuff. He got into a little bit with like, what happens if 10,000 fewer people start showing up for games? Like I would say, what happens if 25,000? Like if you want to see what's happening when people stop caring about football, you can look at Charlottesville and UVA, and they're getting 35,000 people if they're on a good weekend. And that's after years and years and years of their football program not being good. So if you want to, like, I thought there was a little bit more he could have done to show like all the things that could change. And I think, and that's kind of what I was talking about of complacency, probably at all universities, all facets of the university in terms of leadership. Like I feel like because the football culture and the athletic culture of the school has persisted through this 15 years of mediocrity, like people feel like it seems like the leadership felt it was okay enough. Like like that's like Enter Sandman's great. We're still selling out games. Things are going pretty good. Must be like, but at the same time, you've got 15 years of graduating classes that have had mediocre football and don't have that same attachment that the 90s and 2000s classes probably do. And those guys, those graduating classes are probably the people that are carrying the load for like donor contributions and all that stuff. So I think there's a longer term downside risk that, and maybe they get into this behind closed doors, but like what changes when the class of 2015 has been sitting for 20 years without a contending football program, and Virginia Tech's still asking for money.
And if you flip that on its head, what happens with the class of 2015 if you're able to push for a playoff, if you're able to get into the SEC or get into the Big Ten? This is also separate from the fact that going to Blacksburg is not as attractive as it has been over the last couple of years. And I think the reason why is because the town has been completely overrun. It's 30 to 45 minutes to get into a bar. It's a challenge to go, and I enjoy to go. But you're going to be in a situation where you don't want your alums saying, is it really worth getting a sitter for the kids and driving 3.5 hours and then, drinking a 6-pack in the Airbnb? Is that how I want to spend my weekend, to watch a football team that's not competing? So those are two separate issues, obviously. But it's things that have to get fixed if Virginia Tech wants to be a national brand. The silver bullet that I thought, and to me, the most impressive quote was, "It costs money to win. It also costs money to lose." If you are in sales at any level, one of the questions you should always ask your clients or potential clients is, what is the cost of you not doing this? What is the impact on your business or your university or your country or whatever if you don't do this? And the cost to me is losing what made this school special, is losing what made this school a national brand. It's tens of thousands of applications compounding over years. It's the cost of droves of people not prioritizing returning to your town and stimulating your economy moving forward. I can't remember the exact quote. I think, correct me if you know it. It was somebody said, I think it was Sebring said that it is a rising concern or a rising priority. To me, this is the priority. And that might be, that might be blinders on because I care so much about athletics, but I think that without athletics, I don't know where this university is today. It's certainly not where it is, and it won't be moving forward.
It was an emerging focus.
Emerging focus.
And they put it right next to Global Distinction and Virginia Tech Advantage, which are two of President Sands's like big time initiatives that he's in fundraising and all that stuff. And those numbers have been off the charts. Very, very successful, ahead of schedule, big time years in the last year. And that's what Amy Sebring's presentation was all about. It was like, all right, Whit asked you these 3 questions. If you say yes, we want to do this, then we got to figure out where this fits in and how to do this and what are all the options. And they got into a little bit of that. It was a bit of a brainstorming session. I know I kind of jumped on the Twitter one of the guy who was just like, I don't know which board member it was, but was just like, what if we raise ticket prices and we take a little bit off the top of the face value? And it's like, no, this is not an athletics thing. This is a university thing at this point. Mm-hmm. But at that point they were just spitballing in the middle of a meeting. But yeah, it's putting athletics, if you're putting it next to Global Distinction and Virginia Tech Advantage, just putting it on equal par, at least close to it, with like 2 of the biggest initiatives at the university for the last years now, at least under President Sands. So that was one of the things that like people kept asking, like, is the board going to support it? Is what's the feeling on what's going to happen and all that stuff? And I kept saying, like, I don't think President Sands, the COO, the CFO gave a presentation today. Like, I don't think they're in the business of getting turned down by the board, right? Mm-hmm. They don't support things that don't have a chance of getting support. So I thought there was a pretty good chance that they felt pretty darn good about where this was going to go. And now it's just the hard part of, all right, how do we do this?
As we close the book on this discussion, my only ask is there are 2 things that in my estimation need to happen. Football needs to be better. I don't think that we have the funding to compete. It's pretty obvious that we don't have the funding to compete at the top of the ACC every single year into Millennium. That is not a realistic situation, and hopefully that changes given this. But the football needs to be better,
and it's not going to change, right? Because of the Success Initiative. The teams that win are going to get funded at $10-15 million more than the teams in the middle and the teams at the bottom.
Correct.
I don't think it's set up for that. So like Virginia Tech's never going to be like compared to Wake Forest and Boston College just because of how viewership works. Mm-hmm. So I don't think Tech's ever going to be at the bottom.
Right.
But like you went back to earlier, you went back to talking about like Virginia Tech versus Syracuse versus Pittsburgh and the expectation to win those games. And if things don't change on the field, then Syracuse and Pittsburgh and these like schools are going to be making 15, 10, whatever the difference is between like an upper tier and a middle tier payout. So then you do that over multiple years and you're like, we're $40 million behind Pittsburgh. And like, when what does that change as far as the long-term success?
110%. And then the other thing that has to happen is, I think this playing out publicly, it's going to be very easy to shift 100% of our focus to oh my God, we just beat South Carolina, or oh my God, we just lost to South Carolina by 50. I think it's very important that this conversation is continually talked about. And that's painful, right? Like, and I don't mean in the way of like memeing Whit, memeing some of these board members, but it needs to be very transparent that we all now should understand what the problem is, and it has to be rectified. Because to your point, if you look at Florida State has a down year. The stadium's 20% full come week 10. That's never been the case here. But you're teetering on becoming something like that if this does not change. It's not going to be me. It's not going to be you. It's not going to be probably most of the people listening to this podcast. They're going to be out there. They're going to be going back. But this being so public needs to change. And to think that we can't cause change by talking about it, I point right back to when John Yetzi came on this very show. And if regardless of if that was the reason why or the pressure that came from it, they essentially doubled the recruiting staff the year after. And a lot of those asks were met. And I think a large portion of that was pressure applied by Coach Fuente when he was talking to Baylor and, culmination of a lot of things. So I think it's important. And I think it's paramount that this was played out public. I commend Whit if he meant to do it. If he didn't mean to do it, the best mistake that he's ever made. And I commend you for getting it out. So, those are what I would say are the action steps for us moving forward.
The interesting part of and it felt like Tech definitely had an upper hand kind of for the reasons you laid out, right? Like Whit goes and asks for this, says this is what it takes. And this is what it takes to change the future of Virginia Tech football in particular. And puts it on the board to be the ones to say no. And it's, and they clearly had a little bit of leverage in that sense of like, are you really going to be the ones to say no and then own this problem? Which is another reason why I think you felt pretty good about at least the board supporting and being supportive of what Whit was asking. So yeah, I think from now, you're asking, well, what can get done quickly? Where's the focus? Part of this ask is definitely, I think, a lobbying ask to the state government to change some of the rules to get them less strict in terms of what Power 4 universities in particular. The law right now limits UVA and Virginia Tech to 20% of institutional support based on their total athletics revenue. And the presentation yesterday said, Tech's going to be at $37.5 million in support for this next fiscal year, which is 15%. So they got like 5% left they can tap before they're legally not allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's just based on the law that says Tech and UVA as Power 4 institutions are limited to that versus JMU is at 55%. So, I think there's a little bit of an ask of like, can we edit that law a little bit and to free up some more flexibility at the institutional level. So I think that's going to be a topic of discussion certainly next January, February when the General Assembly is in session. So like, it's going to be really interesting now that this is so public and so, like most of the fan base, most of the diehard fan base took this in and sat with it and responded to it and knows about it. So you start like thinking about how that changes somebody's thought process about political, like following the legislation. There was a bill this year that I think it got tabled, but it was similar. It was about that specific piece of legislation. So now you start firing up the Twitter for that. And there's Whit listed all those investments that he wanted to make around like pro style front office and Wi-Fi and all these things that some of them are more
LED lights, Doug.
LED lights.
LED lights.
Only 2 million. But some of those that are, less that are, some of them are easier to do and some of those are harder to do. So now you're going to have people tracking those. So you just got a more probably engaged, more educated, diehard fan base. Like I don't think you're casual. I don't think it reached the casuals yet. or in some form. But like the people listen to this podcast that subscribe to V2 Scoop are definitely all over that.
You mentioned legislation. So unfortunately for both parties, it sounds like Aaron Rouse and Glenn Youngkin will have to get together and push some legislation through. Don't see those two in a room very often, but hopefully regarding that, we do.
The kind of interesting thing to think about, and what we talked about, is like what happens to Blacksburg and the New River Valley with 35,000, 40,000 people going to Lane Stadium. Like, you know,
nothing good.
You very quickly get into like the political discussion of jobs and, you know, commerce and business and all that stuff of like, there are going to be legislators that care about this and like that. And that's kind of something I've thought about, like even on a national perspective of like, a lot of when people get into like the Super League and how small is it going to be and how many schools are going to be involved in the breakaway Super League. Like there's a lot of jobs and commerce and all that stuff involved in those decisions too. So it just has the risk of becoming like a little bit of a political mess.
And I'll tell you what,
we'll see that on the statewide level with this in particular.
For sure. And I'll tell you what, Ed brought this up when I was being doom and gloom. And I'll tell you what, this has been a rough offseason, Doug. It really has. It's been a really rough offseason. But Ed makes a really good point. He says, you know, the ESPNs, the Fox Sports, the CBSs, like in the right world, they're probably rooting for Virginia Tech to get off the mat. Like it is an attractive brand that has the opportunity to do something special. Not a lot of schools can say that in the ACC or the Big 12. There are a lot of schools who don't have any type of history. And one of those schools is Arizona State. And they've played themselves into being in a playoff, hiring the right coach, winning football games, and they've positioned themselves in a great spot to be at the table for some of those. So, and that wasn't a shot at Arizona State's history. But I'm very, very proud of Virginia Tech's history. Commend you a lot on getting that done because maybe it would have snuck through the cracks. I don't know, but I'm very, very, very glad it did not. Doug, got a couple rapid fire ones before I let you go. If you got a couple minutes,
let's do it.
So, one of my favorite things that you do is the Heartbreak City tweets. Now, it's not my favorite thing because I'm in the best mood when these happen. But it does give you a little chuckle as we are all crying into our beer glasses. So I have a question for you. What is the Mount Rushmore of Heartbreak Cities? Now, you can take this one of two ways. You can take it in it worked out, or it was just the most painful, chaotic one that I can remember. And also, what is your process? When do you know that tweet needs to go up? Is it because a couple of times you could have been like getting ready to write the win article?
Yeah.
So
it's a sense developed over many, many years. It really originated during the early ACC basketball days with Seth Greenberg. Mm-hmm. You know, that whole after the Xavier and Dowdell, Jamon Gordon teams, when like the Malcolm Delaney, Jeff Allen teams could not get over the hump and into the NCAA tournament, and we're just losing games at the buzzer constantly. Yeah. That's where that's where that all began. So, you know, you just kind of expect it at this point. You know, I think my Mount Rushmore, Matt Ryan, is number one.
Was that were you on Twitter at that point?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm talking about when you had to hit send. Yes. Oh yeah, you had to hit send on these.
When did I start doing that then?
I couldn't tell you, man. I mean, as of recent, I remember if I'm remembering correctly, you put one out. You might have been early on it with the fourth quarter of the LSU Final Four game. I don't remember exactly when or if that went out during that game. But of recent memory, man, we got a wide bag to choose from.
It's primarily basketball is what I feel like. It just tends to happen that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Or one that comes to mind. Four might be tough. Give me one that just jumps to your mind. Obviously, Matt Ryan.
Recent, yeah. I was going way back to like Sean Dockery hits the half court shot at Duke. Like that was like what was I? I was 12. That was like
put it on MySpace.
That was a stab. Yeah. I don't know what this is. I
gotta tell you, some
great thing that you just block it out.
They jog together. Yeah. I'll tell you some painful ones for me was my buddy Steve Shanley, who's a huge Notre Dame fan, came up for the Notre Dame game in 2019 or 2021.
Yeah.
And, he played into the Virginia Tech thing. He didn't go to Notre Dame, but he wore a Virginia Tech quarter zip. And I remember when we dropped the third down, he took his quarter zip off and he'd be like, I can't handle it. I gotta be a Notre Dame fan for the last couple minutes. And as soon as he did that, I was like, oh, you chose the perfect time to go ahead and do that. So that one definitely, I think of all of them, man, that one was so painful just because the season hadn't fallen off of the table there. You could go with Liberty, but that was such a lost year and just kind of everybody was checked out at that point. A lot of these have happened.
That Notre Dame one did feel with like some finality there, the Fuente era too. I remember going to the Pittsburgh game the next weekend when Tech lost 28-7 or something like that. It was just non-competitive, and that was the third of 3 straight October home game weekends, and there was just nothing left, and it was, and you could feel it as soon as that Notre Dame field goal went through. It was like that's it. If I think I waited until the next week after that Pittsburgh game to finally write like the Fuente's done article. Yeah, but it was really probably that game that did that. So
we will be better in 1-score games this year, Doug, because you quite literally can't be worse. And
that's what Nebraska thought with Scott Frost.
That is what Nebraska thought with Scott Frost, now that you mention it. So I'm so glad that you did bring that back up.
There we go.
Got any record predictions for me? If you haven't done it yet and you have that coming out, save it. But any hot takes or predictions on the record, or just a hot take, something that you're gnawing on?
Yeah, I'm settling into 6-6 again. I think a lot of people are in that ballpark. Maybe the one hotter take that I'm kind of coalescing around is I think the linebacker play is going to surprise some people.
Okay.
I know people are really down on the linebacker play for what's happened the last couple of years.
It's been tough.
Jaden Keller's like back for another year as a guy that's talked highly about in camp, and then you don't see it on the field. But if you look at the rest of the defense, the linebacker position has the most ACC production returning. Keller, Woodson, Caleb Spencer, Michael Short from North Carolina. Like if you stripped away what has happened the last couple of years with linebacker play and just said, here's the players and here's their history, you would say, well, I kind of like the linebackers better than the safeties, which are mostly G5 guys, corners, which are Dante Lovett and Thomas Williams, who haven't proven anything on the field. The defensive line is mostly G5 guys, except for Gilliam and Kamari Copeland, who's never really played. So you'd be like, well, I'm going to take the position with guys that have played in the ACC. So kind of, that said, like, you have to do it with skepticism based on what's happened over the last couple of years of like, is this actually going to come together? But, some fresh coaching and experience, I think you might be surprised.
Times New Bowman. It will not be the last time that you're on here. I do want to give you a chance. Do you have anything coming out recently, or where can people find you if they are not following?
I'm on X, Twitter, Doug Bowman 24/7. Write my stuff at VT Scoop. We'll have game preview coming out next week, like everybody. Started working on that one today, and the season opener is always the hardest one to do because it's just like, don't know how much to take from last year. But that's where I'll be. So find me there.
Doug, appreciate you taking the time. We're dropping the subject, though. Josh Pate put the 2016 conference realignment at the end of his podcast that he just recently did. I did see your tweet. So I encourage all of you to keep the heat on everybody for change. But on this podcast, we will be talking ball unless something else comes up. But we will be chatting with you again soon, Doug. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having me.